Hey guys, Yamakiller here with another What Decks to Play This Weekend video. I want to start this video off with a couple things. First, if you like my channel, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch and Twitter, you'll see in the description below, so you can see me when I am live streaming as well. Second, there are some of these formats I'm going to go over that I don't know all that much about, so I'm going to go over them very, very briefly compared to others which I've been playing a lot recently. I'm going to go over them more in depth. And I think that should be it, so let's get right into the video. First, I'm going to start with Standard. I'm going to be honest, I have not played Standard for months, although I do talk with people who regularly play Standard on Arena, as well as big tournaments on the weekends, MCQs, Red Bull events, CFB Pro events, all that stuff, and I've been told that basically playing anything but Gruul is probably a big mistake. While it does just try to curve out and does not have necessarily that much play to it, just being able to curve out, play Embercleave and the Great Henge as ways to just make it so your opponent can't really get back into the game is very, very powerful. And I think it is well positioned in the metagame because the people that have been playing a lot have told me so. Sorry that I do not have much personal experience with it, but this is a format that I'm not particularly invested in. But I have a lot of input from people who are invested, and this is what they told me to be playing. Now let us move on to Pioneer. Another format I'm not 100% invested in, but I've been talking to some people who've been playing it a good chunk, and these are a couple of my thoughts based on what they have told me. So the first thing is Azorius Spirits. Not many people are playing it, but there's this one guy named Trapped who has just been crushing the challenges with it. I think he's got 5 or more top 8s back to back with this deck. It seems pretty reasonable, Lofty Denial for a counterspell, lots and lots of good flying creatures. Watcher of the Spheres makes it so your 3-drops turns into 2-drops, your 2-drops turns into 1-drops. It's just got a lot of different moving parts that all can work really well together. Quick kills with Supreme Phantom and Empyrean Eagle, good disruption with Lofty Denial and Spell Queller, good ways to get back into the game with tapping creatures down, Nebelgast Herald, and attacking, as well as Spectral Sailor to draw cards. It's kind of got a lot of different things that are going well for it. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to come back when you're behind, and a lot of your creatures can die to small removal spells out of like a deck like Mono Red or Mono Black. But besides those matchups, it seems pretty well positioned and has lots of good disruption and can attack in a reasonable way. Let us move on to the 2 combo decks that I think are pretty good as well right now. This Lotus Field deck, bunches of people have been crushing with it recently. It won like the most recent Pioneer big event. It's just been doing really well out of the hands of a few people. You have Lotus Field plus Hidden Strings and Vizier of Tumbling Sands and Pour the Pages to generate a lot of mana, Peer into the Abyss to draw your deck, along with Dig Through Time, and Fae of Wishes to find your kill conditions in the form of Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, Niv Mizzet, or I guess not Niv Mizzet, but Ugin, more Peer into the Abyss, Thought Distortion if you're playing against a control deck. But basically, the point of this deck is draw your entire deck, mill over your entire deck, and then Jace, Wielder of Mysteries to win the game. And while it is a little bit click intensive at times to win, something like this seems very good as it is somewhat hard to interact with from the opponents. Another combo deck that I think is pretty good is Oops All Spells. You have Sylvan Caryatid plus Neoform to get Undercity Informer or Balustrade Spy if you Neoformer Eldritch Evolution, Sylvan Caryatid, or one of your other 2-drops. You mill over your whole deck, you get 4 Creeping Chills, 4 Silvermate Ghouls, along with some other things like World Spine Worm to make it so you don't mill out, and then you win on the following turn after dealing 12 damage, then you deal them a lot more damage, and that's your way to win. Now, this deck is a little bit fragile. If your opponent has a Graveyard Hate piece, you're probably not winning. Not many people are playing those, although. And your draws are a little bit clunky because, you're playing a bunch of spell lands, so sometimes you just are really, really slow. Sometimes you don't have the correct ways to combo. Sometimes you just draw cards like World Spine Worm, which are completely textless in your deck when they're not in the yard, along with cards like Creeping Chill, basically. So sometimes you have some clunky draws, but you also have turn 3/4 wins, so it gives you some nice quick kills, as well as the ability to just, be a combo deck that doesn't have to interact with the opponent. Now let's move on to some more interactive decks. We've got Sultai Reclamation. It's basically just a control deck with Uro and Reclamation to make it so you can use Shark Typhoon, Chemister's Insight, and some other cards that are just very effective when you get to untap all your mana every turn, do things in your main phase, untap, counting your opponent's spells, untap, do things in your main phase, so on and so forth. So it plays very well with that. It's got a lot of good control cards. You know, Censor, Negate, Sinister Sabotage, and Thoughtless Interventions, ways to counterspell, along with Rewind, Extinction Event, Eliminate Fatal Push, Removal Spells, Shark Typhoons to win the game, Chemist's Insight to gain card advantage, and Wilderness Reclamation to gain mana advantage. So, got a lot of interesting things here. Uro is usually a busted card, so playing Uro is usually correct, I have to assume. So any shell that has Uro in it, I'm usually pretty excited to play. Next, a more mid-rangey / control deck, Niv to Light. You've got Uro, Niv Mizzet, Sylvan Caryatid, Bring to Light. Basically, you're just going to play a lot of different cards in your deck of all varying colors, and you got to play the best of all worlds. Sometimes your mana base is a little bit rough, but you also have cards like Sylvan Caryatid, you know, these Tri-lands, Fabled Passage, and all this stuff to fix your mana base. And when your mana is going off and you get to cast your spells, it is very powerful. Though you do have high likelihood of flooding out with 28 lands and Sylvan Caryatid, 4 Sylvan Caryatids, but when you have cards like Niv Mizzet, Bring to Light, and Uro, makes it a little bit harder to flood out once you actually draw them. So I think any of these decks are pretty reasonable to play in Pioneer. I know there's a Pioneer Super PTQ this weekend, so that's why I tried to go a little bit more in-depth in Pioneer, even though I have not been playing it all that much myself. There are a bunch of other decks you can be playing, like Mono Black Aggro, Mono Red. You could be playing Omnath, plus a bunch of ramp things. But these are the decks I know more about, so I'm going to showcase them here. Now, let us move into Modern. Modern, I've been playing a lot of different decks, actually to reasonable success. Some of the decks that have not seen in a while, I think are actually pretty good right now. Crabvine, not a lot of graveyard hate right now, and you can reasonably cast your spells. If your opponent's on like a hand that says, okay, I've got graveyard hate, but nothing really else, you can play cards like Prize of Magdalene, Silvermate Ghoul, and Uro even, and Vengevine, and kind of just, you know, punk your opponent out with just kind of these like on-curve creatures that aren't that great, but if your opponent isn't doing much and only has graveyard hate, you're going to be doing well. And you also have nut draws where you can go like turn 1 Merfolk's Secret Keeper, or mill yourself 4, mill some Vengevines, Stitch Supplier, mill some more Vengevines, or Creeping Chills or Silvermate Ghouls, and like kill your opponent on turn 2 and 3. And you can play some longer games with Uro, recurring Vengevines multiple times with Grave Crawlers, and so on and so forth. So I think this deck is pretty reasonable. You do have to get kind of lucky with your mills, but when you do get lucky, it feels really good. Another off deck right now is Devoted Druid. Not a lot of targeted spot removal. Not a lot of decks like Jund going around, or Mono Red Prowess right now. So I'm pretty excited to play Devoted Druid strategy. Really good against the control decks and combo decks. As you are a turn 3 combo deck yourself, you have inevitability with things like Postmortem Lunge and Odometer's Call to get your Devoted Druid very, very often, along with Eldritch Evolution. And you've got a lot of ways to win, you know, Dustwatch Recruiter, Finale of Devastation, Court of Calling, Luris into just replaying your spells out of the sideboard. And against decks like Mono Red Prowess that have a problem, you do get 6 pro-red creatures, 4 Forge Tender, 2 Core Firewalker. And against the control decks or Jund decks, you have 4 Veil of Summoners. So pretty excited about how this deck played out. We did get a 4-1 with it on stream the other day if you wanted to look at the VODs of that. But this deck feels like pretty well positioned if you can dodge the Jund and the Mono Red Prowesses of the world. But if you think that is going to be a high likelihood of most of the metagame, I would not pick this deck. But if not, I would pick this deck. Now, there's basically another couple strategies I could go over. I want to just showcase them, not necessarily in deck list form, but more just in talking about them. There's 4-color Omnath control decks. There's lots of different flavors you can play. You can play Saheeli combo. You can play Field of the Dead as your win condition mainly control. You can play Niv to Light as your Omnath ramp control deck. Basically, there's a bunch of different Omnath flavors, and another flavor of deck that I think is really going to be good is Prowess flavors. You can either play Mono Red, Black Red with Death Shadows and such. You can play Blue Red, although I'm not a big fan, with the 5-drop that turns to a 2-drop with Manamorphose or some other instant sorcery. So there's a lot of different decks you can play, and I think within those archetypes are really good. Or you can play these more off-the-wall decks that if your opponent doesn't have the right interaction, you can really get them without them being able to stop you, like Devoted Devastation, Crabvine. You could play something like Ad Nauseam, but just some sort of combo deck. So basically, I'd like to think that there's like a couple different strategies, but more macro archetypes of Omnath control or some form of control deck with Uro and Omnath. There's Prowess decks of various flavors, and then there's the combo decks. And I think everything in between is a little bit out of place right now, like playing Gruul mid-range, only really good against the 4-color control decks if they aren't on their mana correctly and can't deal with Blood Moon. something like Jund really is struggling to deal with most of the control decks and even the prowess decks now with how much card advantage they have. Mono white is kind of okayish in this mid-rangey show, but like you still have some kind of poor matchups. So I really just try to stick to the macro archetypes of combo, Omnath, or prowess, and I think everything else, while being tier 2, can still do well, but it's not going to be doing as well as those tier 1 archetypes that I'd like to lay out. Let us move on to Legacy. Now, Legacy, I know the best decks, Temur Delver, Snoko. I think anything else besides playing those two is probably a leak in your play and making a mistake if you're trying to register for a big event. But I have had some success with this deck in the big events that I have been playing, and I think it is very fun. Mono Blue Karn Echoes. You get to play Chalice of the Void. You get to play Lion's Eye Diamond plus Echo of Aeons combo. You get to play Karn the Great Creator plus Mycos Lymphatis combo. You get to play Narset plus Echo of Aeons combo. You get to have good forms of card advantage in Emery plus the Baubles. You have Urza and Sai. You get to play a lot of different moving parts that some of them work really well with the other parts. Some of them are kind of clunky together. But when you get all the parts together working correctly, it just feels incredibly powerful and very fun to play. And nothing is quite as fun as Wheel of Fortuning, where you get to draw 7 and your opponent gets to draw 1. Feels really fun and good. And while you have some problems in certain matchups, I think this deck is very fun, and I plan on playing it this weekend on Sunday because there's a Modern PTQ that I'm going to be playing at 7 a.m. and the challenge right afterwards is Legacy, and this deck is pretty quick and fun to play. But if you are somewhat newer or you just want to play the tier 1 or whatever the best decks are, some form of Snoko, some form of Temur Delver, those are your best bets. Let us move on to Vintage. Vintage, I still think they're the 3 big macro archetypes. There's Xerox of some form, combo, and there's Dredge or Bazaar decks. Bazaar decks can look like this. You know, Dredge, just flip over your whole deck, win the game some way. Some form of Xerox, less mid-range. Sultai, mid-range. Not as much Xeroxy, but Deathrite, Shaman, Tarmogoyf, Leovold. Basically a Legacy deck ported over to Vintage. You've got some PO and combo, as well as Doomsday. I think Doomsday is the best beginner deck. It's pretty easy. The Doomsday piles usually just have Ancestral, Black Lotus, Thassa's Oracle, and 2 cards can basically be whatever most of the time. So Doomsday is pretty easy nowadays. This is what I plan on playing this weekend. Doomsday did fairly well over Eternal Weekend. Had a 4-3, a 3-2, and a 7-3. While not great results, I feel like I messed up a couple times and could have done it significantly better, and had some spots where I kind of got vintaged out, where my opponent just, went, okay, Ancestral Recall, okay, Triple Force you, okay, you lose, type stuff. There's also shops you can play, some form of shops. You can either play Golos or Ravager shops, although I think those decks are significantly further behind than the Xerox, Combo, and Bazaar decks. But that's Vintage for you. Pauper, really, really quick overview. Tron, basically tier 0 from what I've been told. 4 to like 6 copies, almost always in the top 8 of most Pauper events online. You have some other decks that you can play, like Mardu Monarch, which is fine, pretty bad against Tron. You can play Boros Aggro, which is fine, pretty bad against Tron. You can play Burn, which is somewhat 50% against Tron, and pretty bad against the rest of the field. You can play Elves, which is like reasonable against most of the field. You can play Affinity, good against Tron, bad against most of the other field. It's kind of just like, it's a Tron world and we're all living in it. So I would highly suggest playing Tron. You're going to play against some hate cards, but even through that, I still think Tron is the best deck. If you guys like this video, I know I didn't go over everything so much in depth as I wanted to. Throat and mouth gets a little bit dry near the end of these videos, but if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate everyone who watches these videos. I appreciate people who like them and watch them and ask for them every week. I know I've been slacking on them a bit. I try to come back with some amount of knowledge on some of the formats, but I appreciate everyone who has watched. Thank you guys for watching. I'll hopefully be back and do this weekly. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.